Hello. Welcome to today's edition of the Academy. Today we're going to continue our look at Sun Tzu's Art of War, Chapter 6, Strong Points and Weak Points. Now, in the last video, we talked about the first 5 sentences. Today we're only going to concentrate on the next 3. Now, this video is going to be a little challenging to do. It's not quite... it won't be short because even though there are only 3 sentences, there's a lot to these, but it's kind of hidden away. The challenge in these 3 sentences, Sun Tzu's trying to make some points, and he's really resorting to pretty extreme hyperbole to make the points. And so we may have to peel back a few layers of the onion to actually get at what he's trying to talk about before we can even hope to relate it to what's on the tabletop. So with that, let's go ahead and get started and take a look at starting with sentence 6. So, an army may march great distances without distress if it marches through country where the enemy is not. You can be sure of succeeding in your attacks if you only attack places that are undefended, and you can ensure the safety of your defense if you only hold positions that cannot be attacked. Hence, that general is skillful in attack whose opponent does not know where to defend, and he is skillful in defense whose opponent doesn't know where to attack. So those are the 3 sentences, 6, 7, and 8. A lot in there. The first 2 are filled with hyperbole. But let's see if there's really something behind these. So the first one is, an army may march great distances without distress if they march through country where the enemy is not. Okay? Duh. If there's nothing in the army's way, they can relax as they move with freedom to get to their objectives. I think he's trying to make 2 points here, 2 halves of the same coin. The first one is, in order for you to be very efficient with your movement and your maneuvering your army, you want to try to take advantage of every opportunity where your opponent has left holes that really are not going to interfere with your movement. Those might be areas where they don't have fields of fire covering them. Might be areas where there literally are no units in your way. The other side of the coin, though, is you need to defend against, or I shouldn't use those words. You need to actually guard against setting up situations where you are giving the opponent those avenues by which they can move without any resistance at all. So think about those 2 halves of that coin. I think that really helps make the point for the tabletop here. Of course, he is talking also on a grander scale where you're talking about moving the entire army toward your objective. I'm speaking more in terms of the tabletop, of course, dealing with moving single units or a couple units through these areas that are less well resisted. That one's relatively easy, but sentence 7 is kind of a challenge because the hyperbole is more in your face. You can be sure of succeeding in your attacks if you attack places that are not defended. The whole point of having a game is to have an attacker and a defender. So you're not going to actually attack something that's not going to be defended. And where in battle do you really see situations where you're attacking some place that's undefended? Well, let's dial that back. Remember, it's hyperbole I think he's using here. And what he's really the point he's trying to get across is if you think about the undefended places, which is what the actual Chinese speaks of, he's talking about weak points. And Huang Si, I believe that's how you pronounce his name, actually has a good list of possible interpretations here. For example, he's thinking of the weak points. For example, where the enemy general is lacking capacity, whether it's in soldiers or their morale. It could be where the walls of defense aren't strong enough, or the armor isn't thick enough, kind of thing. Maybe the precautions aren't being taken. The defense is not strict enough. Maybe it's a situation where the reinforcements can't come in time, or maybe provisions. This one's not going to apply to tabletop much, but provisions or supplies are scarce. Maybe those are the areas. Those are weak points that he kind of brings out as what Sun Tzu's really getting at. You want to make sure you're attacking these type of positions. don't go where the defense is the strongest, where the walls are the thickest, if you will. Don't go where the morale is the strongest, where the enemy is prepared for you, where they've had time to bolster defenses and such. So this is actually kind of taking this whole strategy, tactical theory, to the level of art. Because what you have to do is look at your initial layout, lay of the land, at the beginning of your turn, regardless of what game system you're playing, and look at what are the positions in the enemy's side of the board where the weak points exist. And then you have to actually apply the force appropriately against those. If he's good, he will minimize those weak points or hide those weak points from you. Now let me think of a couple examples. We'll use one. If you have an opponent's force does not have sufficient anti-aircraft capabilities or anti-tank capabilities, what you can do is you can leverage your air force or your armor to really apply the pressure. That's attacking their weak point, countering it with, it's a rock, paper, scissors thing we're dealing with here in a lot of ways. But the rock, paper, scissors doesn't necessarily apply just to units. It's also fighting styles. So, for example, if you have a defensive position that is where the opponent has hidden themselves, if you have anything that has indirect fire that will be able to ignore line of sight restrictions and what have you, that's a way you can deliver that. So again, here's the rock of the indirect fire against the scissors of hiding the units, right? So you have to look at all those possible options and find out where your opponent is actually weaker. Maybe your opponent has set up his forces in such a way that he's planning a particular, we'll just use an example of a flank attack. He's going to put pressure on one half of the table as opposed to different specific points along the table. He's decided to concentrate to one part. But what that does is it basically opens a gap on one side of his line where there might be a weak point that you could actually get in. In fact, you might be able to get behind him. So things like that to look for. He's strong in front, right in front of the units that he's going to use to come at you on that one flank, but his weak spot is the other part of the board, and right at the gap between those two halves of his units. You want to try to strike in there. Now, another possible way to interpret this, not in general but on the tabletop, is looking at the various units that you have that are facing. Has he layered his defenses? There's a lot of concepts that I'll be covering in future videos, such as fields of fire and defense in depth, stuff like similar to that, area denial. And you have to look and see if the opponent has applied those principles or not. If he essentially has a front line that is a single line of his units, he has nothing really in depth that can catch a breakthrough, then that's a weak point that you can exploit by punching through with enough force with a mobile unit, whatever kind of mobile unit you have. That could be cavalry, that could be air cavalry, it could be motorized infantry, bikes, you name it, whatever could move fast enough through that point of exploitation. Break the line in that narrow, thin line, break through, funnel other units through. They don't have anything right behind them to prevent you from getting back there. Okay, it's a weak point. Attack there. Don't attack in the section of his battlefield where he's got a line of units and then just a little bit further behind he's got another layer of defenses. That's how you're going to kind of want to look at this, one of the ways. In the next sentence, it flips it on the other side. You must ensure the safety of your defenses if you only hold positions that can't be attacked. Obviously, the only way you're going to do that is if you literally isolate your entire force on a position where they can't draw a line of sight, they can't move onto it because maybe it's on a plateau, a bluff, and there's no direct route to advance on top of it. and then they have no air support, so there's no way they can actually attack you. Not going to happen on a tabletop. Not going to happen in warfare. Okay, so what is he really getting at here? Well, what he's really trying to talk about is presenting your opponent with strong points and hiding your weak points. You may not have units to make a good defense in depth. You may not have strong anti-armor, for example. You may have a good Air Force, but it's susceptible to his anti-aircraft. You have got to figure out how you can hide those weaknesses so your opponent doesn't know where to attack, right? So a lot of this can be done. There's just so many possibilities. It's hard to go through each one. But if we revisit the examples we used for the attack, let's look at this defense in depth kind of thing, where you don't want to have a single layer of your defensive positions. You want to have staggered. Make sure it's in depth. Now, you may not have enough units to cover the entire length of your board. Well, you may not need to. Just maybe shorten your line up so it's from a board edge to the back of the board. Doesn't need to be a continuous line, but you need to have units staggered in such a way that, yeah, if he gets through the front one, there are units nearby that can intercept and prevent a breakthrough from really cascading. I don't know how many of you are familiar with football, American football, but that's actually a pretty good analogy here. Is you have a line of scrimmage, you've got a line of backs behind that, then you've got additional players behind that. So as defenders are guarding against any of the plays that the offense can do, they have to struggle to get through those three different layers. Now, it is entirely possible for the defender to decide to shift shift their team members in such a way that they've got a shallow defense, where most of them are up on the line. There's very little in the back. Makes it easy for a breakthrough. And there's a lot of that kind of tactical play involved in American football. And that's kind of what you're doing here. As long as you've got players on the defensive team that are not committed to a particular position and move forward, they can hang back enough that they can intercept anyone that happens to break through that front line. So if a runner, for example, or the pass is made right behind that front line, there's a second line of defense, maybe not right there by the guy with the ball, but close enough that after a few steps, they're intercepted. So even on a tabletop, you can do the same thing. A unit comes through, breaks through a front unit, but the two units behind are not directly in front of the breakthrough unit. They're off to either side, but they're within a one-turn movement of interfering and blocking or plugging that hole. So that's a way to hide a weak point. Another way, if you want to, you can think about this. If you have a situation where you have certain units are weaker than others for various reasons against what the opponent has, you can disguise those inefficiencies by the way you deploy the units, maybe making the more fragile ones a little further behind. It's going to take some work. Again, this topic is actually much bigger than what this video can cover, but what you're trying to do is prevent the opponent from being able to see your weak spots. You're going to have them, but you need to make sure the opponent can't see them. That's the key. And it's all this sentence 7, that's what he's trying to get through with this hyperbole. Okay, so there's a commentator actually that kind of summed it up, still using hyperbole, but his name was Cheng Yu, I believe is how you pronounce it. He's again addressed both halves of Sun Tzu's statement here, but when he gets to the part about the defensive side, he's talking about hiding your units, so to speak, your weaknesses, so that your opponent can't know their whereabouts. And that's what that does. Is it basically, because the enemy can't see a weak point, they don't really know where to attack. So that's what we're looking at in this sentence area. You have to know where to attack as the attacker, and you have to make sure your opponent doesn't know where to attack as the defender. And in sentence 8, he summarizes what he means by these two by matter-of-factly saying is the general is skillful in attack whose opponent doesn't know what to defend, and is skillful in defense whose opponent doesn't know what to attack. So let's review very quickly on those 2 points. Ignoring the hyperbole went before, because we're actually going to talk about various types of weak points and strong points, and the next segment actually talks about deception in the space. But that's what this sentence 8 leads into that very well. If you keep your, as an attacker, your interests, your goals, your plans hidden from the enemy, not obvious, then the opponent really won't know where to defend. In fact, he may defend the wrong spot, and that'll open the line for you somewhere else. You can do this as a quick example of creating a localized area where you're very strong and keep a scattered force with the rest of your units. Hopefully even some be in reserve so you have more flexibility. But it looks like you're very strong there, and your opponent thinks that's where you're going to attack from, and that's where you're going to operate out of. When in reality, your plan is to use these, what look like dispersed units, and coordinate them into some other attack against a certain point in your opponent's line that they're not even expecting. Okay, so that's the kind of thinking he's talking about here. And then on the skillful in defense side of things, he's literally talking about making sure your opponent doesn't know where to attack you, making yourself look strong everywhere. That doesn't mean you defend every single part of your line or every part of the board, or every objective even on the board. In fact, he has stated in previous chapters, and he'll say it again in later chapters, you do not want to defend everything that could be attacked. That just disperses you, prevents you from being strong at any one point. So keep your strongest part of your force, if you will, almost in reserve, so that it is flexible enough to move around the battlefield. But make sure that you are in a position where no matter where your opponent chooses to come from, you have a strong response ready for him. Or at least it looks that way. It takes practice. It's not always possible. Remember, sometimes you're in a battle situation that is not ideal for you. Your unit mix is not really good for the mission at hand. There's an imbalance in combat capabilities. There's a lot of reasons that this may be difficult. So do not give up on the concept. Strive to achieve it whenever you can. And with practice, you'll eventually get there. And as you go through this and you find these challenges, you're going to pick up some, oh yeah, I could do this the next time. I could do it slightly differently this way, and your repertoire will grow and you'll be much more successful. So with that, we'll conclude today's Academy. And next Academy, we'll go ahead and pick up on basically more art of deception, all with the focus on deceiving the opponent about weak points and strong points. All right, see you in the next video. Share, like, and subscribe, and let your friends know about this. Hope you found it helpful. Ask questions below, and I'll get your answers to you. All right, thanks. Bye-bye.